February 13th, 1945, 9:51 p.m. General Major Heinrich Vogler stands at the window of a requisitioned manor house on the eastern outskirts of the city, watching the first flares descend through the winter darkness like slow-motion Christmas ornaments, red and green marker lights, what the British called Christmas trees, floating down on parachutes to illuminate the target zone below. He has seen these before. He knows exactly what comes next. In the valley beneath him, spread across 12 square miles of medieval streets and Baroque architecture, sits his army. The 47th Panzer Grenadier Division, 18,400 men, 340 vehicles, 78 artillery pieces, the fuel depot, the ammunition stores, the field hospital with 2,200 wounded soldiers who cannot be moved. The flares keep falling, hundreds of them now, the entire city glowing beneath their artificial dawn. Vogler checks his watch. In approximately 4 minutes, the first wave will arrive. He has no anti-aircraft batteries. They were pulled 3 weeks ago and sent west to defend the Rhine crossings. He has no night fighters. The Luftwaffe ceased meaningful operations in this sector in November. He has no bomb shelters adequate for his men. The city's civilian population already fills them to capacity. What he has is a front-row seat to the systematic annihilation of everything under his command. He thinks briefly of ordering his staff to evacuate the manor house. But to where? The roads are clogged with refugees, military convoys, and broken-down vehicles. The surrounding countryside offers no shelter that would survive a direct hit. And in truth, he knows that the manor house is not the target. The city is the target. His men are the target. Everything he has spent 2 decades building as a commander, every relationship, every hard-won lesson, every soldier he has trained and led and kept alive through 3 years of brutal warfare on the Eastern Front, all of it concentrated in 12 square miles of medieval streets that are about to become an inferno. He does not pray. He stopped praying at Stalingrad when he saw what men did to each other in the cellars and the sewers. But he does something like praying now. He asks silently for his men to be granted quick deaths. He asks that they not suffer. He knows the mathematics of incendiary warfare. He knows that this prayer will not be answered. The sound reaches him before the aircraft do. A low thrumming that builds and builds until it becomes a physical pressure against his chest. Then he sees them, wave after wave of 4 engine bombers emerging from the clouds, their navigation lights extinguished, visible only as darker shapes against the darkness, filling the sky from horizon to horizon. The first bombs begin to fall. Heinrich Vogler was born in 1896 in the Bavarian town of Landshut, the son of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. He grew up in a house with 3 rooms and 7 children, learned to read from his father's history books, and developed an early fascination with Napoleon's campaigns. At 14, he could recite the order of battle at Austerlitz from memory. At 16, he enlisted in the Kaiser's army as a private. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 154 pounds. Unremarkable in every physical dimension. What set him apart was his memory. He could look at a map once and reproduce it perfectly. He could walk through terrain and recall every fold of ground, every tree line, every potential field of fire. His commanding officers noticed. By 1917, he was planning battalion-level operations on the Western Front. By 1918, he held the Iron Cross First Class and a commission as a lieutenant. Between the wars, he rose steadily through the ranks of the Reichswehr and then the Wehrmacht. He was not a Nazi. He was not political at all. He was a professional soldier who believed in preparation, in logistics, in the careful husbanding of resources and men. He wrote 3 technical manuals on infantry tactics that became required reading at the War College. He married a woman named Elsa in 1924. They had 2 daughters. By 1943, he commanded a regiment on the Eastern Front. By 1944, a division. He was known for 2 things among his peers: his photographic memory for terrain and his obsessive attention to casualty rates. He kept meticulous records. He knew the name of every officer under his command and most of the senior NCOs. When a man died, Vogler wrote the condolence letter personally. He had written 4,847 such letters by the end of 1944. Each one contained at least one specific detail about the deceased, something that demonstrated the man had been known, had been seen, had mattered. His superiors considered this habit eccentric. Some thought it bordered on insubordination, a waste of a general officer's time. But Vogler believed that the letters were the most important thing he did. More important than the tactics, the logistics, the endless meetings. A man who died under his command deserved to be remembered by name, deserved more than a number in a report. He would remember this conviction later, when the numbers were all that remained. On January 28, 1945, he received orders to move his division west to this city to rest and refit before being thrown back into the line against the advancing Soviets. He was given 3 weeks. He requested dispersed billeting, spreading his men across multiple locations to reduce vulnerability to air attack. The request was denied. There was not enough transport, not enough time, not enough of anything. His division would be concentrated in the city centre, utilising every available building, every cellar, every warehouse. He had protested. He had sent formal objections through channels. He had even attempted to reach Army Group headquarters directly. The response came back in 4 words: "Orders will be obeyed." Now he stands at the window and counts the bombers as they pass overhead. He stops counting at 200. There are more behind them, an endless stream, and he realizes this is not a raid. This is an extinction event. The first incendiaries hit at 10:03 p.m. The British had spent years perfecting the art of creating firestorms. They had learned from Hamburg, from Kassel, from Darmstadt. The technique required specific conditions: dense urban architecture with narrow streets, wooden roof structures, a critical mass of incendiary devices dropped in a concentrated pattern within a short time window. Done correctly, the individual fires would merge and create their own weather system, a tornado of flame with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour and temperatures approaching 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The Pathfinder aircraft had done their work well. The marker flares delineated a target zone roughly 2 miles by 3 miles, encompassing the entire historic centre and the adjacent industrial district where Vogler's division was concentrated. The first wave dropped 4,000-pound high explosive bombs. These were not designed to kill directly. They were designed to blow open rooftops, shatter windows, and rupture gas mains, to prepare the kindling. The second wave, arriving 8 minutes later, dropped the incendiaries. 4-pound magnesium sticks and 30-pound phosphorus canisters, falling in clusters of 38, designed to scatter across rooftops and penetrate into attics where they would ignite wooden beams and spread downward. In the first 15 minutes, approximately 3,200 separate fires ignited across the target zone. Vogler watched from his window, 3 miles distant. He had a perfect view. The manor house sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, chosen for its strategic sightlines, now offering a panorama of annihilation. The fires did not spread randomly. They grew upward and outward in expanding circles, consuming block after block with a systematic efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. The night sky turned orange, then red, then a white so bright it hurt his eyes. He could feel the heat on his face through the glass. At 10:31 p.m., the firestorm achieved critical mass. What had been hundreds of individual fires merged into a single conflagration. The superheated air rose with such force that it created a vacuum at street level, and the surrounding atmosphere rushed in to fill it at hurricane velocity. Buildings that had survived the initial bombing were ripped apart by winds exceeding 170 miles per hour. The streets became wind tunnels of flame. In the city centre, men who had taken shelter in cellars died within minutes, not from fire, but from asphyxiation. The firestorm consumed all available oxygen, replacing it with carbon monoxide and superheated gases. Those who fled into the streets were knocked off their feet by winds exceeding 170 miles per hour and swept into the flames. Those who remained underground suffocated, and those caught between, in doorways and windows and on stairs, died in ways that combined all of these: burning, suffocating, and being torn apart by the wind, sometimes simultaneously. The physics of the firestorm were merciless. At ground level, the inrushing winds created a noise that survivors would later describe as a screaming, a howling, a sound unlike anything they had heard in nature or in war. The flames rose in columns that reached 15,000 feet into the night sky, visible from aircraft 50 miles away. The heat was so intense that asphalt liquefied and flowed like water. Metal streetcar tracks twisted into impossible shapes. The stone facades of centuries-old buildings exploded as the moisture inside them vaporized and expanded faster than the structure could contain it. Vogler watched all of this. He did not look away. He owed his men that much. Vogler's chief of staff, Oberst Werner Brandt, appeared at his elbow. Brandt was 44 years old, a former economics professor from Munich who had been conscripted in 1941 and had proven unexpectedly competent at military logistics. His face was grey in the reflected firelight. "What are your orders, Herr General?" Vogler did not look away from the window. "There are no orders to give. We watch." The second wave of bombers arrived at 1:22 a.m. This was the British innovation that made their raids so devastating. The first wave created the firestorm. The second wave, arriving 3 hours later, caught the firefighters and rescue workers in the open. It caught the survivors who had emerged from shelter. It caught the reinforcements rushing in from surrounding areas. This second wave carried another 4,800 incendiary bombs, along with high explosives and delayed action ordnance designed to detonate hours after impact, killing those who thought the danger had passed. Vogler had sent messengers to his subordinate commands in the first hour, ordering any survivors to evacuate toward the eastern suburbs. He had no idea if the messages arrived. The telephone lines were down. The radio relay station had been in the city centre. By 2 a.m., the firestorm had consumed approximately 1,600 acres. Temperatures at its centre were later estimated at 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt steel. Hot enough to ignite human beings through radiant heat alone, without direct contact with flame. The pilot of a Lancaster bomber at 18,000 feet reported that he could read his instruments by the light of the fires below. At 3:17 a.m., the Americans arrived. The United States 8th Air Force had been planning a daylight raid on the city's marshalling yards. The British night attack had not been coordinated with them, but the fires provided a perfect aiming point. 311 B-17 Flying Fortresses dropped another 4,800 incendiary bombs, along with 1,600 high explosive bombs, on a city already burning. Vogler watched the American formation pass overhead in perfect combat box formation, silver in the morning light, untouchable at 25,000 feet. His division had no weapons that could reach that altitude, No weapons that could do anything at all. The bombs fell for 22 minutes. When the last American aircraft departed, Vogler conducted a mental inventory of what remained under his command. He had arrived in the city with 18,400 men. His dispersed headquarters company, located in the manor house and surrounding outbuildings, numbered 340. A reconnaissance battalion that had been conducting exercises 12 miles to the north numbered approximately 800. A supply convoy that had been delayed on the roads and never reached the city contained 1,200 men and 90 vehicles. Everyone else had been in the target zone. He would later learn that 847 of his men survived from the city itself. Most of them had been on the western edge of the concentration, in brick industrial buildings with deep cellars and thick walls. Most of them were wounded. 163 of them would die in the following days from burns, smoke inhalation, and injuries sustained during evacuation. Final count of 18,400 men, approximately 3,200 survived. Of 340 vehicles, 94 were recovered, most of them damaged beyond repair. Of 78 artillery pieces, 3 were salvageable. The fuel depot, the ammunition stores, the field hospital, the communications equipment, the supplies stockpiled for 3 months of operations, all gone. In 8 hours, Vogler's division had ceased to exist as a fighting force. The fires burned for 7 days. Vogler entered the city on foot on February 15th, 2 days after the raid. The firestorm had created its own microclimate, and the ruins were still too hot for vehicles. He walked with a handkerchief pressed over his nose and mouth, though it did nothing to filter the smell. The smell was the thing he would remember for the rest of his life. Not the sight of the destruction, though that was beyond anything he had witnessed in 30 years of military service. Not the silence, though the absence of any living sound in a city that had held 650,000 people was profound. The smell. It was sweet and chemical and organic all at once. It was the smell of everything that had ever lived in the city, rendered down to its base components by heat. The smell of wood and cloth and stone and flesh, all indistinguishable, all merged into a single olfactory signature that would follow him into his dreams for decades. He walked through streets that were no longer streets. The firestorm had collapsed buildings inward, filling the roadways with debris sometimes 20 feet deep. He climbed over mounds of rubble that had been Baroque churches, medieval guild halls, centuries of accumulated architecture reduced to smoking slag. He found his headquarters in the city centre, or what remained of it. A 4-story building that had housed a bank before the war, thick-walled and supposedly fireproof. The walls were still standing. Everything else was gone. The interior had burned at such temperature that the structural steel had warped and the concrete had calcite spalled, exploding in layers like an onion. In the basement, where his operations staff had been working, he found shapes. They were not recognizable as human. They were not recognizable as anything. The heat had reduced organic matter to its mineral components, leaving behind forms that were vaguely humanoid, but composed entirely of calcium and carbon, posed in positions that suggested their final moments. Arms raised, bodies curled, mouths open. He counted 43 shapes in the basement. His operations staff had numbered 48. The mathematics suggested that some had escaped, or that some had been so completely consumed that nothing remained at all. Vogler's adjutant, a young Hauptmann named Erich Dressler, who had been with the reconnaissance battalion and thus survived, accompanied him through the ruins. Dressler was 26 years old. He had been a law student before the war. He vomited 4 times during the inspection, but did not ask to be relieved. At one point, navigating through what had been the textile district, they came upon a cellar entrance that had not been completely blocked. Vogler descended alone, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Dressler offered to accompany him. Vogler told him to wait above. There are some things a commander must see alone, some reckonings that cannot be shared. The cellar extended for approximately 400 feet, a series of connected basement rooms beneath a row of merchants' houses. It had been designated as an auxiliary shelter for his 3rd Battalion. The battalion commander, Major Friedrich Holzer, had chosen the location personally. Holzer had been a meticulous officer, careful about the safety of his men. He had inspected the cellar himself and pronounced it adequate. He had probably died believing he had done everything right. Inside, Vogler found approximately 340 bodies. They had not burned. The cellar had remained structurally intact, protected from the flames by earth and brick. But the firestorm had consumed all the oxygen from above, and the vacuum had drawn the air out of the cellar through 100 small cracks and fissures. The men had suffocated within minutes, probably without understanding what was happening to them. They lay in orderly rows, most of them on their backs, some of them holding hands. A few had made it to the stairs before collapsing. One man, a sergeant whose face Vogler recognized, had died with his fingers clawed into the doorframe, as if he could pull oxygen from the stone. Vogler spent 11 minutes in the cellar. He counted 347 bodies. He recognized 19 faces. When he emerged, Dressler was waiting with a report. A rescue team had found survivors in a factory on the southern edge of the destruction. 17 men, badly burned, but alive. The field hospital in the eastern suburbs was treating them. Vogler nodded. He looked back at the cellar entrance, then at the smoking horizon where the fires still burned in isolated pockets. "Write this down," he said to Dressler. Dressler produced a notebook. Losses of the 47th Panzergrenadier Division. Raid of February 13th through 14th, 1945. Personnel. Estimated 15,200 killed or missing. Wounded. Estimated 3,000. Equipment losses. Total. He paused. Add a note. Request immediate dissolution of the division and redistribution of survivors to intact units. The 47th Panzergrenadier Division no longer exists. The request was approved on February 19th. The 3,187 survivors were distributed among 3 other divisions. Vogler was offered command of a replacement formation being assembled from training units and rear echelon personnel. He declined. On February 22nd, 1945, General Major Heinrich Vogler submitted his resignation from active service, citing a heart condition that had not troubled him before and would not trouble him afterward. The resignation was accepted without comment. In the chaos of the collapsing Reich, there was no time to investigate or contest such matters. He returned to Bavaria, to the town where he had been born. He walked the final 30 miles because the trains had stopped running. He arrived at his childhood home on March 4th to find it still standing. His 2 sisters and their families crowded into the 3 rooms. His wife and daughters had fled west in January and were somewhere in the American zone. He would not see them again for 11 months. On May 8, 1945, the war ended. Vogler listened to the announcement on a radio powered by a car battery and felt nothing. He had stopped feeling anything on the night of February 13th. In 1947, he was called to testify at a British military tribunal investigating the bombing campaign. He provided a detailed account of what he had witnessed, speaking for 4 hours without notes, his memory as precise as it had always been. When asked his opinion of the raid's military necessity, he declined to answer. When pressed, he said only that he was a soldier, not a judge, and that judgments on such matters were above his authority. The tribunal found that the raid had been conducted within the laws of war as understood at the time. No charges were filed against anyone. Vogler returned to Bavaria. He took a position teaching history at a gymnasium, the same school where his father had taught 40 years before. He never spoke of the war to his students. When they asked about his medals, which he had placed in a drawer and never looked at again, he told them that medals were for things best forgotten. When they pressed, as young people sometimes do, he would change the subject or end the conversation. Eventually, they learned not to ask. He was a good teacher, patient with struggling students, demanding but fair with the bright ones. He had a gift for making the past come alive, for helping young people understand that history was not a collection of dates and names, but a vast tapestry of human choices, human failures, human triumphs. He never taught the Second World War. When the curriculum required it, he arranged for a colleague to cover those weeks. His students found this strange, but did not question it. In 1956, a former comrade from the division attempted to organize a reunion of survivors. He sent letters to everyone he could locate, including Vogler. The response rate was low. Most of the survivors had scattered across Germany and beyond. Many had changed their names. Some refused to acknowledge ever having served at all. Vogler did not respond to the letter. When a second letter arrived, and a third, he wrote a brief reply. He thanked the organizer for his efforts. He declined to attend. He offered no explanation. The reunion was eventually held in a beer hall in Munich in 1957. 47 men attended. They drank too much and cried and embraced and told stories about comrades who had not survived. Many of them left feeling worse than when they arrived. The gatherings were not repeated. He outlived his wife by 7 years. His daughters gave him 4 grandchildren. He attended their baptisms, their graduations, their weddings. He was present at all the ceremonies of ordinary life. He died in 1978 at the age of 82 in the same house where he had been born. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service only in passing. It described him as a beloved teacher and grandfather. It said nothing about the night he stood at a window and watched 15,200 of his men burn to death. But the memory remained. His daughter, in an interview given in 1994, recalled that her father would sometimes wake in the night calling out numbers. Always numbers. The date, the time, the casualty figures. He would sit in the darkness, she said, reciting them like a prayer. February 13th, 1945, 9:51 p.m. 15,200 dead. 3,200 incendiary bombs in the first wave. 4,800 in the second. 4,800 in the third. She asked him once what the numbers meant. He told her they were a form of remembering, that as long as someone remembered the exact figures, the dead were not entirely gone. That precision was a form of respect. She asked him if it helped, the remembering. He said no, but it was all he had. Here is what the story of Heinrich Vogler tells us. War destroys the men who fight it. This is obvious. Less obvious is what it does to the men who command it, who survive it, who are forced to witness it without the ability to act. Vogler's hands were clean. He gave no orders that night because there were no orders to give. He did not kill anyone. He simply watched while everything under his authority was annihilated, and then he lived with the watching for 33 more years. There were no monuments to his division, no plaques or memorial services. The men who died in the firestorm were buried in mass graves or not buried at all. Their remains so thoroughly consumed that nothing could be identified. They became statistics, numbers in a report, entries in a military archive that few would ever read. 15,200 dead in 8 hours. The mathematics of industrial killing. But Heinrich Vogler remembered them. Each morning, in the years after the war, he would rise before dawn and sit at his desk with a blank sheet of paper. He would write names. Every name he could recall from the 47th Panzer Grenadier Division, starting with the officers he had known personally and working down through the ranks. Some mornings he wrote for 10 minutes. Some mornings he wrote for 2 hours. He never completed the list. He never stopped trying. By the time of his death, he had filled 2,847 pages with names. His daughter donated them to the military archive in Freiburg. They remain there today, a monument in handwriting to men who have no other monument, remembered by a commander who could not save them and could not forget them. On his deathbed, according to his daughter, his final words were numbers. February 13th, 9:51 p.m. And then, more quietly, as if speaking to someone she could not see, I am still counting. The fire in the valley had stopped burning 33 years before, but for Heinrich Vogler it never went out. Some fires burn forever. Some men are consumed by watching.